Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I am once again joining you remotely from southern Texas, just outside of Starbase in the fine city of Brownsville. Hope everyone is doing well and had a good start to their either work or school week, although I believe today is actually a federal holiday, so some of you may have had today off. And if that's the case, A, I'm very envious of that, and B, I hope you had a wonderful and relaxing day. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast this evening. Our photographers, Adam Bernstein and Michael Kane, both have the evening off tonight, as Adam is already en route back to Florida at the moment, and Michael is off this evening. Our friends, though, Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, are helping us out, of course, this evening to provide some tracking views of the Falcon 9 rocket that you see there in the center of your screen. That said, the fellows have been hard at work. Adam down here with me covering Starship Flight 5, and Michael this morning covering the Falcon Heavy launch with NASA's all-important Europa Clipper mission. If you'd like to follow their work, you can find the fellows over on X, Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr., Adam Bernstein at ABern NYC. While you're over there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find us on X, of course, as X, you see on your screen. You can also find us on Facebook as well as Threads. Joined this evening as well by our wonderful moderator, Clisty Lee, in the live chat. Keep our eyes peeled for any of the other mods who may be able to join us tonight. But you can help Clisty out, keeping things kosher in the live chat by A, keeping things apolitical. Remember, this is not a politics chat. This is about life and space exploration. And remember, every launch could very well be someone's first. So if someone asks a question that may seem obvious to you, it's clearly not obvious to them, and you'd want to extend them the same courtesy that you yourself would want to receive and make this a welcoming community. Also powered by a wonderful channel member community, speaking of, on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Patty Chichil, Josh King, Butterfly, Cumulus Granatus, Big 816, Meg McIlroy, Sulfur for Lunch, and many others. Rita Loy, good evening to you. Bubba Ray, hello, hello. Zeus's mommy, great to have you all with us tonight. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course, the ability to watch all of our launch liftoff moments live in 4K. And as we are getting things rolling, as the case sometimes happens, we do unfortunately have a launch delay just coming through from SpaceX. Liftoff was originally just less than an hour away now, as you see with the countdown clock. It's now T minus 1 hour, 30 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. SpaceX now counting down to a new T0 of 2:10 a.m. Eastern. That is 0610 UTC for our friends joining around the world. SpaceX not stating a reason for the delay. They certainly seemed primed to launch at the opening of the window, which was originally set for 1:34 a.m. Eastern. Again, for those who are just joining us as we're getting our live coverage started, really just within minutes of getting our live coverage started, we do have that launch delay from SpaceX pushing back the original start time or the original plan T0 from 1:34. Now SpaceX targeting 2:10 a.m. Eastern. And that's early, early in the window, if you can frame it like that. The launch window for this Starlink mission lasts until 5:22 a.m. Eastern. As long as SpaceX has not begun fueling, they do have the ability to push back the T0 liftoff time. That will, of course, potentially have knock-on implications for SpaceX's second Falcon flight, which, as of right now, is still listed as scheduled for 1:07 a.m. Pacific. It's 4:07 a.m. Eastern, 8:07, 08:07 UTC. Again, while SpaceX has not made an official update to that time, given the slip with this first launch and the, depending on the reason for the slip, the potential for it to push back even further into the window will likely have additional knock-on effects. But sadly for everyone, I do not have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you with exact precision that that's A, what will happen, and B, by how much. But of course, as we continue to get updates through the countdown of this launch, we'll be sure to keep you apprised of all that. Taking a look at the live chat, want to thank the 867 of you who are joining with us live this evening into the early morning hours. It's about quarter to midnight here in Texas. Of course, nearly 1 o'clock there on the East Coast. Want to thank Leslie Danahill for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Leslie. One of our pre-existing channel members. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Leslie in the live chat. And we hope you stick around with channel membership. Also want to thank Tom Johnson for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate you, Tom, supporting us at that level. Who says, always enjoy the broadcast. Speaking of enjoying the broadcast, I was out and about at Starbase gathering some video of the booster now that it's back on the orbital launch mount. There were a number of SpaceX personnel around the OLM doing some site surveys of the launch infrastructure, but also doing some detail work, gathering some visual data and doing some post-flight observations following the historic first catch of a super heavy booster. So that work, of course, still ongoing. They're going to want to know as much as they possibly can about exactly how this booster performed as they look to the next flight coming up, Flight 6. By my just very rough assessment of it, and I will couch this in that I am not an engineer nor a rocket scientist, but from just a visual standpoint, the Super Heavy booster did not appear to have a great amount of damage. There was a little bit that was kind of broken off towards the base, but honestly, it looks like a pretty clean booster otherwise. I mean, all things considered. Hours after the booster was caught, SpaceX founder Elon Musk went down to the OLM himself, posted a picture and an update on X, his social media platform, formerly Twitter, saying, and I'll quote, just inspected the Starship booster, which the arms have now placed back in its launch mount. Looks great. A few outer engine nozzles are warped from heating and some other minor issues, but those are easily addressed, he says. Continuing on this quote, Starship is designed to achieve reflight of its rocket booster ultimately within an hour after liftoff. The booster returns within about 5 minutes, so the remaining time is reloading propellant and placing a ship on top of the booster. End quote. Given the amount of time it seems as though it takes to get things ready from a propellant standpoint, as far as the tank farms there near the orbital launch mount, it'll be interesting to see how SpaceX continues to build out that launch infrastructure with the goal of being able to launch within an hour after liftoff. Again, another super heavy booster along with a Starship upper stage. Depending on how often SpaceX is going to want a rapid cadence like that at Starbase, or potentially that could be extrapolated to the Kennedy Space Center and eventually to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Obviously, that'll have a lot of knock-on effects to if it's at the Cape or KSC, other launch providers that are out here, and if it's in reference to down in Texas, certainly to the general public who likes to enjoy that beach access road, State Road 4, going out to Boca Chica Beach. So that balance will be interesting to watch over the coming years as SpaceX continues to build things out. Taking a live look right now at Starbase and the big box here. These views coming to us via our friends at Lab Padre. Appreciated working with them again for our launch coverage of Starship Flight 5. It's a little dark, and I'm not sure this camera view shows it, but the booster transport vehicle was brought out pretty soon after the launch happened and then moved not immediately adjacent to the pad or to the orbital launch mount itself, but is hanging out in the vicinity. I did see that when I was down at Starbase earlier today. So once SpaceX is done with these checkouts of the booster where it currently is, it'll likely be offloaded in the not too distant future and continue to be assessed. It'll be interesting to see what SpaceX ultimately decides to do with that booster, if it becomes perhaps almost like a museum piece, as what they did with the Hopper craft, which is sitting on a slab of concrete just across the road from the two towers. Perhaps Booster 12 will meet a similar fate and become part of SpaceX's rocket garden there. We shall have to wait and see. Currently T minus 1 hour, 19 minutes, 45 seconds to the launch of this Starlink 10-10 mission here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As we posted in the tweet and put up on the website, this mission hits a couple of important notches for SpaceX. This is their 95th Falcon 9 rocket of the year once it launches. Notably, though, this will be their 97th orbital launch, including the now two Falcon Heavy flights that have taken place so far this year. Why is 97 important? Well, it's because it's one more launch, one more orbital launch, I should say, than all of the orbital launches SpaceX completed in 2023. So passing their year-end launch milestone with this upcoming mission tonight into the early morning hours. This will also be SpaceX's 100th launch in total this year. The other three, besides the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, of course, are the three launches of Starship. On board this Falcon 9 flight are 23 V2 mini Starlink satellites getting ready to be added to the ever-growing constellation in low Earth orbit for SpaceX. With the addition of these satellites, that will bring SpaceX's total launch this year up to 1,437. Still a little more than 500 shy of the total Starlinks that were launched in all of 2023. This will also be the 65th dedicated Starlink launch for SpaceX this year. It'll be two more than the total number of Starlink missions they launched last year. There's also the 128th launch of the V2 mini varieties of Starlink satellites so far to date. Now, T minus 1 hour, 13 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the live chat, see a question here from viewer Peeve 1973 asking, is there a reason this booster is so dirty compared to other launches? Well, I'll say the reason it's a little sooty just compared to, say, a brand new Falcon booster. This particular booster, tail number 1080 in the SpaceX fleet, is going for its 11th launch tonight with the Starlink 10-10 mission. As the boosters fly back towards either a return to landing site mission or go to touchdown on a drone ship, they fly back through its own plume, and that creates a little bit of soot buildup on the booster. And so SpaceX, in order to, I guess, let the character of the rockets live on as a hallmark of their reusability, allows the majority of the soot to remain sort of a badge of honor of where this booster has been and the missions that it has helped send up into space. We'll talk a little bit more about the specific flight history of this booster in a little bit, but just for a brief touch on that, it has supported 4 missions to the International Space Station in its life so far, 2 cargo and 2 with astronauts on board. But good question. Also want to thank channel member Well Reasoned for giving a $5 super chat. Appreciate that. It says thank you to the whole launch team for an amazing week of coverage, and thank you mods for the great work. I certainly can't do these broadcasts without the support of wonderful moderators in the live chat helping to keep things moving along. So certainly appreciate Callistia and our other mods as they are able to join. Also want to welcome Randy Pruden joining us at the channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Randy. We're glad to have you with us. I see Bocio Tech is joining us from Point Siena, Florida. Go ahead and let us know where you're checking in from tonight. I know we've got obviously a lot of Floridians who join us on the regular, but also are speaking likely to an international audience. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world and the time frame it is in your locale. Some Edmond, Canada, Boulder, Colorado, Guthberg, Sweden, Port St. Lucie, Florida, Derry, New Hampshire, just down the beach line in Orlando for a well-reasoned Superhawk. Good stuff. Got Australia in the house, California, of course. California will have its own launch coming up later on this morning, assuming all continues to progress well towards the liftoff from Vandenberg Space Force Base. Talk about that mission more as it comes up, and certainly with our live coverage. That one will start 30 minutes before liftoff of the Starlink 9-7 mission, that one carrying 20 Starlink V2 mini satellites, 13 of which feature the direct-to-cell capability. Currently T minus 1 hour, 3 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. Just double checking that SpaceX had not made another adjustment to the T0, and so far we are still continuing to track towards a liftoff at 2:10 a.m. Eastern, 0610 UTC. Again, SpaceX does have until 5:22 a.m. Eastern if they do need to adjust the T0 any further for whatever the reason may be. Weather, though, should not be a reason for any delay in the launch. In fact, according to the 45th Weather Squadron, the probability of violating weather constraints is just 5% for this mission. Put another way, we are looking at 95% favorable weather for a launch in the very much pre-dawn hours here, Florida. Basically a continuation of the lovely weather we saw today for the launch of the Europa Clipper spacecraft. That Falcon Heavy lifting off from the now vacant pad you see here in the big box, Launch Complex 39A. Because the Europa Clipper spacecraft required the full might of the Falcon Heavy rocket, SpaceX flew it in a fully expendable configuration. So the two side boosters, tail numbers 1064 and 1065, made their sixth and final flight on this mission. And the center core, B1089, made its first and only flight with this particular launch. The good news is, though, the Europa Clipper spacecraft had a good separation. It deployed its solar arrays after a few hours of doing some rotisserie-like roll maneuvers to ensure even heating slash cooling around the spacecraft. And it is beginning its roughly 5.5 year journey out to meet the icy ocean moon of Europa that is orbiting Jupiter. Set to arrive in mid-April in 2030. The following year, the European Space Agency's JUICE spacecraft will arrive at Jupiter. It'll make trips around 3 of Jupiter's moons, while the Europa Clipper mission will be focused most explicitly on Europa. And another news of spacecraft traveling beyond Earth's orbit, the Hera spacecraft, which is designed as a follow-on to NASA's DART mission, the Double Asteroid Redirect test, which impacted the asteroid Dimorphos, the smaller of the binary asteroid system of Didymos, at launching successfully, of course, on a Falcon 9 rocket. It sent back its first image looking back at the Earth, helping to go through some checkouts of its optical system as it begins its journey of about 2 years in order to make a rendezvous with Didymos and Dimorphos. Once it arrives there, it's got a nominal mission length of about 6 months. And like the Europa Clipper mission, the Hera spacecraft will also use a Mars gravity assist on its way out to its destination. We're now T minus 59 minutes and counting. Now, once again, under an hour to the planned liftoff of the Starlink 10-10 mission. Let's go have another check from what SpaceX has published. And yes, they're still targeting 2:10 a.m. Eastern, 0610 UTC. taking a look at the live chat. Question from just an ordinary guy asking to me directly what it's like to, quote, lead the streams as the commentator here. Well, if I really had full control over the launch dynamics, of course, having everything go right on time at the start of every window would be my first preference, maybe followed second and very closely by not having quite as many middle of the night launches, but there's a whole variety of reasons why they do that. As we are now within an hour of planned liftoff of this Starlink flight, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline, the milestones that we're looking for nominally as we progress towards a now hopeful liftoff at 2:10 a.m. Eastern. Things will get going with the SpaceX launch director giving the go for the startup propellant load at the end of their poll, which is done electronically. SpaceX is running its countdown from the Hangar X site at the Kennedy Space Center. It's the facility where they refurbish Falcon boosters to prepare them for future flights, as is, of course, the case with the booster you see there live on your screen on the right-hand side. B1080 going for flight number 11 tonight, or this morning. Once that go-ahead is given, fueling starts with two events simultaneously, the loading of RP1 or rocket-grade kerosene, as well as liquid oxygen. RP1 is loaded on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, and the LOX goes on to the Falcon 9's first stage at this point. About T-minus 30 minutes is when cryogenic helium is loaded onto the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. That helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. That's followed up by helium loading on the second stage just a few minutes thereafter. About T-minus 23 minutes, the loading of second stage RP1 wraps up. At T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill down process begins. That's where they are thermally conditioning the feed lines ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. We'll see that visually evidenced at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds by the so-called big vent from the strong back. It's a good visual indication that fueling is moving along on time and on schedule, as expected. That'll set up LOX load on the second stage to begin at T-minus 16 minutes. T-minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill down process begins. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps to help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins. That involves the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector with a strong back reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff, at which point pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. Three minutes before liftoff, the first stage LOX tank is full. A minute later, same is true on the second stage. And at that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as you hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown turns over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. Then the SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch about 45 seconds out. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds for a Falcon 9 rocket. And if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff. And that right now is coming up at 2:10 a.m. Eastern, 0610 UTC, 153 minutes. 7 seconds. Now T minus 46 minutes, 51 seconds and counting. You're coming upon the point at which the SpaceX launch director will need to make the call on the start of propellant loading. It's coming up in less than 10 minutes. So we'll be keeping our eye out for any additional updates to the T0 liftoff time for this mission. So far, still sticking with that 2:10 time. As we're waiting for the start of prop load, do see a couple of folks mentioning or questioning where this rocket was going to be flying once it leaves the pad. So let's go ahead and turn to that now and talk a little trajectory, shall we? Starlink 10-10 mission, of course, as the name suggests, going to the 10th shell of the Starlink constellation in low Earth orbit. For the purposes of trajectory, that means they'll be flying in a northeasterly trajectory along the coast of the eastern United States. So for folks in the northeast part of Florida and Georgia, the Carolinas, if you've got some friends or family, or you yourself are there, be sure to tell them to turn to the skies, looking out towards the Atlantic Ocean. If it's not too cloudy, you might catch a glimpse of the Falcon 9 as it makes its ascension. Following stage separation, the Falcon 9 first stage booster B-1080 set to land on the SpaceX drone ship you see there on your screen, called a shortfall of gravitas. It's one of two SpaceX drone ships that is ported over here on the East Coast. The one which will be used on the Starlink 9-7 mission. The only current SpaceX drone ship on the West Coast is, of course, is Still Love You. Here on the East Coast, there's also Just Read the Instructions. In addition to recovering the booster, SpaceX will also endeavor to cover these payload fairings at the top of the rocket. The company saves about $6 million per recovery effort. So naturally, it's an important part of their business model whenever possible to be able to scoop those fairing halves out of the ocean water, refurbish them, turn them around for future flights. And as you can see in this image from a SpaceX presentation earlier this year, they splashed down to those ocean waters under this port of parachutes before they're brought aboard a recovery vessel, like you see here with this photo captured during a recovery about midway through the year last year. SpaceX continues to push its reusability goals. They currently have the goal stated of reaching up to 40 flights with its boosters as well as its payload fairings. We've had some boosters be retired as they got on to their twilight years, if you will. The current still flying flight leader for the Falcon 9 first stage boosters is B-1067, which currently has 22 missions under its belt. Its next closest competitor is B-1063, which has flown 20 times so far. As of now, the maximum number of flights that a booster has achieved is 23. Two of those, B-1061 and B-1062, both reached those milestones earlier this year. B-1061 was retired after its flight on October 7th. B-1062 made its final flight on August 28th. Currently T minus 41 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Just a few minutes away from when we should have the SpaceX launch director nominally conclude the poll for the start of prop load. As of right now, they're still continuing to target that T0 of 2:10 a.m. Eastern. Again, we'll of course let you know if that changes, but its relative stasis suggests that things are continuing on track here. Taking a look at the live chat, I see Astro Joe, one of our moderators, has joined us here today, also marking 27 months as a channel member. Really appreciate that, Astro Joe. Who says, and I quote, reinforcements have arrived. I'm sure Felicity Lee is very grateful for that. And again, just to have her back here, I know this is a contentious presidential election year. Lots of thoughts and feelings about the whole state of not only that race, but other geopolitical events happening around the world. There are plenty of times and forms for that, and this is neither the time nor the form. We try to keep things apolitical here at Spaceflight now and focus on A, first and foremost, the mission at hand, and B, space more broadly. So we appreciate you respecting the live chat here and helping our moderators out by leaving that for other venues. Now T minus 37 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. At this point, the launch director should have wrapped up that poll at the call on the start of prop load. From what we can tell, they are still tracking towards a liftoff at 2:10 a.m. Eastern, 06:10 UTC. So time you see in the countdown clock should still remain relevant and accurate. Taking a look at the live chat, want to welcome, hope I'm pronouncing this right, or Zaler. Apologies if I butchering that, but welcome aboard to channel membership at the pad leader level. We're glad to have you. Taking a look at this Starlink coverage map, hopefully SpaceX will issue a more updated one in the near future as they continue to grow out both their Starlink internet constellation as well as their customer base for the Starlink internet service. This is a good overview of sort of broadly speaking where things stand. In late September, the Starlink division of SpaceX noted they had reached a total of more than 4 million customers around the globe, an increase from the 3 million mark that was announced just earlier this year. So the rate of customer growth has been quite steadily rising as SpaceX continues to deploy more satellites into its low Earth orbit constellation and also create notable demonstrations of its capabilities in the marketplace. For those watching the airline news space, you'll may have noticed there have been a number of announcements of various airliners who've decided to add the Starlink internet to their planes. Most recent announcements that was published or promoted by SpaceX and Starlink, I should say, was Hawaiian Air and their Airbus operated flights, now all equipped with complimentary Wi-Fi via Starlink. And of course, for those who recall the views from the Starship upper stage as it was making its re-entry and going on through its coast phase towards re-entry and going through peak heating as it made its way down for a soft splashdown in the Indian Ocean. SpaceX put that little bug in the top right-hand corner, powered by Starlink. And with very few exceptions, there really weren't any noticeably dropped frames. So, again, another piece of advertising for the service that SpaceX putting on display in a variety of different ways. Talking about the Starlinks themselves, there are 23 of them on board this particular flight, marking the 65th Starlink launch so far this year. Just about T minus 33 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should be fueling its Falcon 9 rocket if they are, in fact, still targeting a T0 at 210. They'll look for signs of fueling. You see that sort of white horizontal band near the base of the rocket. We should start to see a little bit of vapor form around that area of the vehicle. And that'll be an indication that the super cold densified liquid oxygen is being loaded on board the Falcon 9's first stage. And we do have a statement from SpaceX, in fact, that, quote, Falcon 9 is ready, weather is superb, and propellant load has begun for tonight's launch of 23 Starlink satellites from Pad 40 in Florida. So there you go. We'll, of course, continue to watch for those visual signs of fueling, but heard it from the horse's mouth. And given that propellant load is underway, that means SpaceX is committing to that T0 of 210. If for whatever reason they were to encounter an issue at this point, they would have to stand down and target a backup launch opportunity. You are starting to see some of that vapor there where I was talking about. Their next available opportunity for launch, if needed, is tomorrow, Wednesday, October 16th, with a window that opens at 2:33 a.m. Eastern. Coming back to the payload that's on board this flight, these 23 Starlink satellites, they each clock in at about 1,760 pounds or about 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering, as opposed to the previous generation, which used Krypton Hall thrusters. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. These will be deployed at about 174 miles or 279 kilometers in altitude at a 53.16-degree inclination. Comparing these V2 minis to their predecessor, they have 4 times the capacity. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They used upgraded phased array antennas. They're about a little more than 2.5 times heavier than the Starlink version 1.5 satellites, and again, replacing those Krypton Hall thrusters with Argon Hall. Thanks to the partnership between Black Sky and HEO, we do have this actual picture of a Starlink V2 mini satellite on orbit. It's captured by one of HEO's satellites. You can see those two solar arrays extended from the main body of the spacecraft. This design, of course, a bit different than the original Starlink satellites, which had just the one solar array that extended upwards, sort of like a shark fin. Currently T minus 28 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX is loading cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. That helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. They will do the same on the second stage in the next few minutes here. Now T minus 25 minutes, 7 seconds and counting. SpaceX is in the process of loading cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's second stage at this point in time. Taking a look at our live chat here. First off, I want to thank the now more than 2,500 of you who are joining with us live tonight in the early morning hours. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button if you would be so kind to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank a few folks for their support in particular. Thanks to Angie Scoot for a $5 super chat. Appreciate you, Angie, who says, thank you all for doing this over on the Cape Causeway watching. Nice to have updates. We're happy to provide them for you. Ryan Snyder with a $5 super chat as well, who says, I love watching launches with this channel. You guys do a great job. As I was down in Starbase, happened to run into a family who was visiting the area from Houston. Unfortunately, they were not able to make it down in person to see the launch itself, but mentioned that they did check out our live stream as it was in progress with our partners, Lab Padre, on that live launch coverage. If you do happen to spot us out and about, never feel bashful about saying hello. It's always good to meet the Spaceflight Now broader community out in the world. So hopefully our paths will cross beyond the launch live streams down the road. Be sure to say hello. Also want to thank Rocket Profit, one of our channel members who I see has their little YouTube icon as I believe that's the Flight 4 mission patch for Starship. But thank you, Rocket Profit, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity. And to our newest 10 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Rocket Profit in the live chat here. We hope you stick around with channel membership. Now, T minus 22 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. In just a couple of minutes, we'll see the beginnings of the strong back chill down sequence, as evidenced by the so-called big vent. The process begins at about T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, but the big vent comes up about 20 minutes and 20 seconds. So you can see that frost line continuing to build on the Falcon 9 rocket as the LOX tank continues to fill, as well as the RP-1 tanks on both the first and second stages. Second stage RP-1 load should have wrapped up by now. As folks are continuing to come on into the broadcast, now just a little more than 21 minutes before planned liftoff. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Spaceflight Now channel here on YouTube. Click that bell icon so that you get notified whenever we do start these live launch streams or post new videos to the channel. Of course, it's been a whirlwind covering the launch of Starship Flight 5 and had a pre-launch video to get everyone ready for what was to come. And we'll have some post-launch content coming out as well. So be sure to keep it right here on the channel. Keep your eyes peeled for that. There'll be some stuff for the members, of course, along with the video that goes out to the broader public. And I'll echo comments from Florida Girl. Also, another way to help us that is quick and easy is just by hitting the like button on this video right now as you're watching. If you haven't already, that will allow YouTube to see the engagement and bring this live coverage in front of more eyeballs. We certainly appreciate that. And you can see the big vent now in full swing here. T minus 19 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. Now T minus 16 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. The big vent you see is tapering off. They're now moving into second stage LOX load. With the exception of the slight adjustment on the T0 from the original time. So far, everything else seems to be moving smoothly with this countdown so far tonight. As this SpaceX booster B1080 is preparing to launch for an 11th time. Before it does, let's go ahead and talk about the mission past before it proceeds with the mission at present. The first launch of this particular booster happened to be one carrying astronauts on board. That was Axiom's second private spaceflight to the International Space Station. This particular mission was commanded by former NASA astronaut and current Axiom Space employee Peggy Whitson. She was joined by fellow American John Schaffner in the pilot seat, and two mission specialists from Saudi Arabia. Next time this booster launch was back on July 1st, 2023, when it sent up the European Space Agency's Euclid Observatory. The wide-angle space telescope is designed to better understand things like dark matter and dark energy. Flights number 3 and 4 were a pair of Starlink missions. Those were Starlink 6-11 on August 27th and 6-24 on October 22nd of 2023. Flight number 5 was another Crew Dragon mission, this one named Freedom, which is currently docked to the International Space Station. This was piloted by former NASA astronaut and Axiom Space's chief astronaut, now Michael Lopez Alegria, lifting off on January 18th, 2024. Of course, Peggy Whitson training right now to command the AX-4 mission to the International Space Station, set to launch sometime in early 2025, pending, of course, the availability within the International Space Station schedule. With the AX-3 flight, Mike L.A. became the first person to fly twice on board a Dragon capsule. That very small club expanded to Jared Isaacman when he commanded the Polaris Dawn mission, having previously done so for Inspiration 4 using the Crew Dragon Resilience. Peggy Whitson will become the third person to fly aboard a Dragon for a second time when AX-4 lifts off. Sixth launch for this booster, 1080, came with the launch of CRS-30. This was the first time that a cargo Generation 2 Dragon lifted off on a trip to the space station from Pad 40, paving the way for the first crew to lift off on that pad, that, of course, being the duo who flew the Crew 9 mission, Alexander Gurbenkian and Nick Hague. Flight number 7, back to Starlink land we go. Starlink 6-52 on April 18th. Starlink 6-62 on May 23rd. That was followed up by the Astra 1P/SES mission, lifted off on June 20th of this year. And then finally, another trip to the International Space Station, this time a Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft on the NG-21 mission, part of its commercial resupply services to contract obligations to NASA to send up cargo and supplies to the ISS. Cygnus also having the benefit of being able to help provide boosting capabilities to the orbiting outpost. Now T-minus 11 minutes, 48 seconds and counting to the liftoff of Mission 11 for B1080, Starlink 10-10. Now T-minus 10 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. SpaceX is preparing to launch what will be their, make sure I've got this stat right, the 380th Falcon 9 rocket to date. Let's go ahead and talk about their workhorse launch vehicle. Stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. Again, this is B-1080 going for flight number 11 in the pre-dawn hours today. At the base of any Falcon 9 booster are 9 Merlin engines, hence the name, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs, which will help this booster land on the drone ship. Shortfall of gravitas is what's on deck tonight. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure which consists of an aluminum honeycomb core that's surrounded by carbon fiber. Take a look at that image of it on the right-hand side of your screen. You can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9. So it comes back through the atmosphere tail first, like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are three mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. And the first stage main engine cutoff. High pressure helium is used to release those latches, and four pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also safely housed inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Of course, we will be watching with great interest on the performance, of course, to be able to deliver the Starlink satellites to their intended orbit, but also what comes after that, as it was the deorbit burn on the Crew 9 flight, which was off by 500 milliseconds, according to a SpaceX official, which caused the upper stage to perform its deorbit burn and have that fall a little bit outside of the planned zone for recovery of that upper stage where it would burn up upon re-entry. It was a little bit outside of that pocket. And so SpaceX stood down from launching for a little bit here until I feel like it had a good grip on that and submitted its findings to the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, T-minus 6 minutes, 56 seconds and counting, just for a quick point in time. The engine chill down sequence on the Falcon 9 is underway. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps to ensure they are not damaged during the startup sequence. Coming back to our overview of the Falcon 9, up top are the payload fairings. They are a composite structure, a carbon composite material that are 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The fairing halves will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. And as we talked about earlier in the broadcast, they splash down to the ocean waters beneath under the support of parachutes. While SpaceX doesn't often publish or make mention of the payload fairings insofar as their flight history, they're getting close to 20 with at least one, if not more, of their fairing halves. And like the Falcon 9 first stage boosters, they're also working to certify them for up to 40 flights. T-minus 5 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. We're just about a minute away from the strong back retract sequence beginning. That process will see the clamp arms underneath those payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector. The strong back reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 and stays that way until liftoff. at which point it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion. Sure. Oh, I think my phone is still on. As the Europa Clipper mission did launch in a Falcon Heavy earlier today, want to just take a quick look at that gas giant and its Jovian moons. This view brought to us by our friend Pete Carsons with
Progress
Max Q
recheck has started.
Productions. You can see the bands of Jupiter here, those iconic stripes that go around this gas giant and pulling back out to a wider view. Uh, just above it, if you look at that first dot that's closest above Jupiter in this picture, you can see there is the moon of Europa, the destination of the Clipper spacecraft, which will arrive in April of 2030. Now, T minus 3 minutes, 10 seconds and counting on this Falcon 9 flight as we're approaching the conclusion of first stage liquid oxygen load.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call there. Last bit of fueling we're awaiting is stage 2 liquid oxygen load to be complete. Should hear that call out in less than a minute.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Good call from SpaceX, and with it, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. What you're seeing here are the ground gas closeouts.
Ground gas closeouts.
Next, just about the 1 minute mark or a hair after, since the SpaceX feed is coming in on a slight delay. Here, the Falcon 9 is at startup. It denotes that control of the countdown is being handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The
Falcon 9
propellant
is in
tanks
startup.
are being pressurized. You hear that call just there. We're now waiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch, and then this bird will be ready to fly.
SpaceX LD, go for launch.
Good call there. We are now just about 30 seconds away from the launch of what SpaceX hopes to be a double launch day with its Falcon family of vehicles. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 on Starlink 10-10. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Now a minute into flight, a good ascent of the Falcon 9 so far. Falcon traveling faster than the speed of sound. And the vehicle will throttle down as it approaches max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle.
Max Q.
Good call for max Q. We're now going to hit a few
engine chill has started.
events in fairly rapid succession that call for MVAC chill. They're thermally conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine before it ignites. So here's the sequence of things. At about T plus 2 minutes, 26 seconds, the first stage main engine cutoff will happen. That'll be followed a few seconds later by stage separation. Then about 2 minutes, 37 seconds into flight, the Merlin vacuum engine will ignite, followed by fairing deployment just before the 3-minute mark.
Vehicle is following a nominal trajectory.
It looks to be a very good and even first stage burn so far. Coming up on Miko. There you see Miko. Stage separation. And ignition.
Miko?
The Merlin vacuum engine.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC startup.
Good calls, good onboard camera views. As our P. Carsons continues to track the progress of the Falcon, you see the payload fairings now being deployed.
Fairing separation confirmed.
See those Starlinks now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. Occasionally you can catch the glint of them in Pete's view, although you might have just seen the last of them at this point. Actually, with this wider view, you may catch them every now and again as they're
Vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
reflecting the glow of the Merlin vacuum engine, preparing to float down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes. Now, a little more than 4 minutes into flight, the next mission milestone we're watching for is the start of the first stage entry burn. It's coming up at about T plus 6 minutes and 9 seconds, so less than 2 minutes now from that.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
You may have been hearing sort of a low rumble or what almost sounded like a gurgle. Our microphone is placed fairly close to I mean, still in a safe position, but closer, I'll phrase it like that, to the edge of the water near the press site lawn. That noise we're thinking is coming from a gator. Obviously, the Kennedy Space Center press site and the rest of KSC is nestled among the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge, so it is very much their home and habitat, and we are just guests in it. At T plus 6 minutes, 4 seconds and counting, we're coming upon the first stage entry burn beginning in real time.
Stage 1 FTS has saved.
Pete is looking to see if he might be able to catch that in the view of his camera. See it there from the onboard SpaceX cameras may be a little tricky. It's not always easy to catch the entry burn, depending on how much cloud cover there may be. That burn is now concluded. Sets the booster up for a landing burn to begin at T plus 7 minutes, 52 seconds. The time you're going to want to watch for is
vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
From the SpaceX feed there, coming in about an 8 second delay from real time. You can see though that entry burn really accelerating or decelerating, I should say, the speed of the Falcon booster, setting it up for a safe and nominal landing burn and a touchdown on the drone ship, a short fall off gravitas. Just heard that call. The Falcon booster now transonic, coming below the speed of sound.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Good call for the start of the landing burn.
Terminal guidance.
Should see views of the drone ship momentarily. Getting some audio from that drone ship now.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And for an 11th time, you see B-1080 down safe on the drone ship.
Stage 2 shutdown.
And a good call for stage 2, concluding its first burn. Didn't hear the call out for nominal parking orbit, but set to enter that at this point in the mission and remain in that coast phase until T plus 54 minutes, 51 seconds. And then there will be a brief 1 second burn to circularize the orbit of the upper stage. That's the last big mission milestone before the Starlink satellites are ready to deploy at T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 44 seconds. with a good launch and landing of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Obviously, the main thrust of the mission is still very much in swing until the Starlink satellites are safely deployed in their planned orbit. Let's go ahead and take a look at our mission stats as they currently stand to begin to close things out tonight for this particular mission. This was the 11th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1080. This was SpaceX's 380th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 95th of 2024, the 325th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was the 100th SpaceX launch of 2024, including now two Falcon Heavy launches and three flights of the Starship. This was SpaceX's 120th orbital launch in the last 365 days, the 209th orbital launch from Pad 40, and the 264th overall orbital launch from that pad. And with this, you can see now SpaceX has eclipsed the total number of launches that they achieved in all of 2023. We'll see how much further they can get so far this year. Suffice to say, their original planned goal of getting an average of 12 launches, 12 orbital launches per month over the course of the year. So a total of 144 missions by the end of calendar year 24 seems probably a bit of a tall task considering they've had to stand down from launching now three times so far. But we shall see. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 81st landing of a booster on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. That marked the 277th drone ship landing and the 353rd overall booster landing for SpaceX. Finally, some industry stats. This marked the 70th orbital launch from Florida so far this year. Speaking of year-end records, last year there were a total of 72 missions which launched from the Sunshine State between Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and the Kennedy Space Center. So we are very close to eclipsing that year record as well. This was the 104th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 114th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 185th orbital launch around the world. With 6 orbital launch failures so far this year, here's where the pie chart currently stands. U.S. holding on to 61% of the pie, China with a solid quarter, followed by Russia with 11 launches, Japan with 5, India and Iran with 3 apiece, European space stations 2, and North Korea with 1 launch attempt, which ultimately ended in failure. And with that, you see the strong back has been brought to the upright position here, part of SpaceX's process for turning around the pad as quickly as possible. Of course, now that they've been cleared from all of their prior anomaly investigations, including the most recent one with Starlink, or excuse me, with the Crew 9 mission, SpaceX is going to be looking to getting things back and revving that engine on the Falcon 9 machine, especially as it concerns Starlink and, of course, its other customers. Look to the future for the next opportunity for the OneWeb 20 mission to get back on the pad. That was on the docket when the Crew 9 anomaly happened, and we haven't seen it come back publicly on the schedule since then. So likely going to be potentially the next mission after the Starlink launch from Vandenberg this morning. But we'll have to wait and see. SpaceX may have another batch of Starlink satellites that'll come before that. With that, I want to thank our moderators in the live chat, Callistia Lee, Astro Joe. Appreciate the both of you this morning. Our thanks as well to Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions for providing tracking views with us tonight. Also want to thank, of course, our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. And most of all, thanks to you for wherever you're watching from this morning. SpaceX has one more mission up to bat, the Starlink 9-7 flight, which again at this particular juncture is still listed as having a liftoff at 1:07 a.m. Pacific. That is 4:07 a.m. Eastern. 04, or excuse me, 08:07 UTC. Spaceflight Now will have a stream on that coming up in just a little bit. And until then, we're going to go ahead and sign off for now. So for all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.